Hello everyone and welcome to part 3 of our Finding Steps Sewalong. We hope that you're enjoying stitching along with us and that you're learning heaps and enjoying the peacefulness of some hand stitching. So we're going to dive right into it and go swap cameras and talk about our design from last week. Now, I believe that I have managed to confuse a few of you. This is our design that we did last week, which is blue diamond waves or diamond blue waves. I'm working on Finding Steps panel 1, but we also have Finding Steps panel 2, which I have here. Now, the two panels are actually complementary to each other. The external shape, the full shape, is actually identical for both panels, but the motifs that are inside vary slightly. Now, I've managed to confuse a few of you because this design actually doesn't appear on Finding Steps panel 2. So that's really caused a little bit of confusion for people. So what you'll find is those of you that are stitching on panel 2, you get a few days off before we work on the next section, which is what we're going to do now. Now, you're not going to get much time off because today we're going to be working on our basket weave section. And I know that it is definitely on both panels and it is going to take you a little while to complete. So it's not difficult, but it is a little bit more time consuming than some of the other designs that we've done. So a couple of other things. It's been requested of me by a couple of different people, and they're wanting to know how to treat the edges of their fabric, so to stop it from fraying. So there's two major ways that I recommend. If you have an overlocker or a serger, as it's called in the States, you can actually just run along this edge. Don't take too much of it off. Just a 4-thread or a 3-thread, just run down, tidy your edges up, just trim your threads, and that will give you a nice finished edge and stop it from fraying. If you don't have that, what you can do is you can just fold your fabric in around about a 1/4 inch and fold it again all the way down, and just use a regular sewing thread, just a regular sewing machine thread, and just do some nice big basting stitches through here all the way down, and that will tuck your raw edges in and stop it from fraying. It will keep your fabric nice and clean, and you don't have to worry about any little edges on the that are fraying and threads that are fraying. The advantage of doing it this way is once you're finished your stitching and you remove those threads, you haven't lost any of your panel at all, and then you can decide how you're going to use it and trim it to exactly the size that you need it to do. Now, depending on how the panel is printed, for these panels, our Finding Steps panels, you really only need to worry about the two sides, because the long sides, the short edges on your panels are actually your selvage, and so they're not going to fray. So you can just leave those on, and that will stop those edges from fraying while you're stitching, and then you're going to trim your panel to size. So I'll talk about that once we've got all our stitching done and some ideas for use of your panel. Sorry about that. So today we're going to be working on the basket weave panels. Now on panel number 1, there's actually 3 of those panels. So we've got one here, we've got a big panel here, and we've got a small panel at the end. So what you will notice with this panel and this one here is that the stitching is really intensive. So it gives you the opportunity to add another thread if you choose to. There's no reason why you can't use your sashiko threads that you already have, but the other option that you have is that you can use a slightly finer thread. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using a Daruma thread. Now these again are a Japanese brand of thread. We don't have a huge range of colours at the moment, but we will certainly be expanding our range of colours. Now if I do a little comparison here for you, You can see quite clearly under the video that our regular sashiko thread is thicker than our daruma thread. Now by going to the finer thread, what it's going to do is it's going to give more definition to our stitches. It's not right or wrong, it's just a personal preference. The other type of thread that you can use, if you choose to, is you can use your Wonderfeel threads. So these are eleganza. Now in our eleganza threads, and I'm going to hold these up to the camera, what you will notice is that we have a, let me just turn this around. So the purple spool, so that's a pearl 5. It's very, very similar to in weight, thread weight, to our regular sashiko thread. So that's a pearl 5, and this one is a pearl 8. In the same color thread, so the green spool is the pearl 8. What you'll notice, you can see clearly there that the pearl 8 thread is just a little bit finer than the pearl 5. So this one, pearl 5, is quite similar to our regular sashiko thread. Pearl 8, a little bit finer and gives us a little bit more definition. Now the other thing, I'm going to keep this one here. I'm going to lay our regular sashiko thread over the top. Now what you can see with our regular sashiko thread is that it has a very low twist to the thread, and that's one of the things that we love about the traditional thread, is that it has a low twist, and we find that the stitches will, it's called blooming, so the stitches will actually open up and look more of a petal shape over time. A thread like eleganza, which is this beautiful color here, you can see particularly when you've got a lot of the thread, you can see it's got much more of a twist to it. It's actually got a little bit of a shine to it as well. So your choice of threads are not right or wrong. Your choice of threads are purely personal. The only type of thread that I wouldn't recommend to use for sashiko is I wouldn't recommend that you use a stranded cotton or a stranded silk. Not because the cotton and the silk aren't suitable, but because the strands are made to be stitched individually. Sometimes when you put multiple strands together, you find that they don't sit well with each other, and you can get little bumps and irregularities in your stitching, and it doesn't sit quite as smoothly as a traditional sashiko or pearl cotton. It's not wrong, it's just can be a little bit harder to manage. So I am going to use this gorgeous daruma thread. I'm going to just cut a little piece off here, and we're going to get stuck into our stitching. Ooh, very blunt pair of scissors today. Okay. Now, for our stitching for this panel, I'm actually going to not start with a knot. I'm going to knot. I'm going to do, once I get my thread threaded, I'll split the thread. If you're struggling to thread your thread, try the other end, and generally it will do the trick. Though today it's not going to. Just going to retrim. Okay. And I'm going to squeeze that thread really tight so the end of it is flat. There we go, first go. Alright, so I'm going to trim my little piece off here that I shredded. Now, there is more than one way to stitch this, but there is one way that I would recommend and one way that I wouldn't recommend. So when we look at this stitching closely, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to pull my camera down, my phone. There we go, it's going to be right in closer. What we've got, if we look at our basket weave, is we've got straight rows of stitching going across. Okay. Or we could stitch 3 stitches in one direction and then 3 in the next direction and then 3 and then 3 and then 3. Now, I'm not going to recommend that you do it that way. I'm going to recommend that we work with straight rows across. And the reason being is we've got moderately strong thread, we've got a soft fabric. What happens when we stitch 3 stitches in one direction, so we're stitching around in a loop, what happens is our fabric will produce, it will bubble up. So it will produce a bit of a channel. And then when we stitch our 3 stitches in the opposite way, it will produce a channel the opposite way. And so what we end up with is we end up with a checkerboard of our fabric. And what we want to do is we want to produce a nice flat fabric. What we're going to do is we're going to stitch our rows across one direction, and then we're going to stitch in the second direction. What will happen is we will be crossing our threads over on the back, and that's okay, but we're going to get a much more even and a much flatter result with stitching like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start in the middle of the panel just to give you a bit of an idea, and I'm going to work out to one edge, come back to the center, and I'm going to work to the other edge. Ideally what you would do if it's a panel or a pattern that you're not familiar with, find the longest row, continuous row of stitching that you can find within your panel to get started with your stitching. So for example, this one under here, depending on how you were stitching it, you may stitch all the way across here in a straight row of stitches, as opposed to these little couple up here. On this side, what we've got is we've got half a pattern repeat missing. So that can actually confuse you a little bit if you're not sure of how the pattern repeat is going to work. So I like to get one started in the center so I know how the pattern will work, and then I'll work out from the middle. Alright, so what I'm going to do with this is I don't have a knot, and I'm going to work with my left to right rows. So if I'm left-handed, if you're right-handed, you're going to work from right to left. So I'm going to just pull my thread through, and I'm going to do a couple of stitches. Don't pull your tail all the way through. I'm going to just load 3 stitches on my needle. I'm going to pull my needle through so my stitches are flat. I'm going to flip my work over, and so that I can see my tail. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave about 1.5 inches to 2 inches on the back. Now I'm going to leave that tail there until I've used this thread. This is not the only way to start and finish your work. I'm going to show you another one. This is the way that I favour for this particular stitch. Now take care that you don't pull your thread all the way through. You don't want to pull it out. So we're carrying our thread through on the back, and we're at the end of the row. I'm going to turn my work. I'm going to go down at the end of this row and up at the beginning of the next row, remembering to leave that little breath of thread so that the thread turns nicely. Okay. Just do that with my finger. If you pull it too tight, just grab it, lift it up a little bit. So you've just got just that little breath of thread, and what that allows your thread to do on the top is it allows your stitches to stay straight, and that little breath of thread on the back is what creates the curve. If we pull it tight, it forces our stitches on the top to curve. That's not what we want. Now I'll just move my hand up a little bit further away from the edge. And I am going to just stitch to the end of the row. And show you how to deal with the tail. Couple more stitches. This is quite quick to do, but we have got a lot of stitching to do, so it's going to take a little while. This would be a great place to try if you've got odds and ends of pearl cotton at home. That's our second row. Now, what you'll find with this is that your stitches will look really irregular. Okay, so you can see my stitches are not 100% perfectly straight. They are slightly irregular. They're not 100% perfect. When you're doing your rows across this way, what you'll find is this irregularity in your stitching is really, really obvious. But once you come and put your stitches in the second direction, it gives you an overview of your stitching, and so it doesn't look anywhere near as irregular. Of course, we like to be as neat as we can, but it's not the end of the world. Okay, we want a stitch to enjoy. Okay, so what I've got is I've got my tail here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just weave it through these designs. So what I'm going to do is I've just got the eye of the needle, and I'm just going to use, you can also use a little tiny crochet hook if you have one as well. So I'm just going to put the thread there, just going underneath those two stitches, grab my thread, use the eye of the needle, drag it through, and I may be able to just get one more. Just using the eye of the needle to drag that end underneath those stitches, and that's actually secured my thread. So you can see that I've got no knot. All I've done is just woven that through. And when I come back to stitch in the opposite direction, what's going to happen is we're going to doubly secure that stitch because we're going to be stitching over the top of it. And in this section here, we're going to be carrying our thread over the top of it. So there's absolutely no way that that thread is going to move. So if I was wanting to end my thread, I would do exactly the same thing. And I would just weave my thread through the stitches that I've already created. Let me just take my needle up to third row. Okay. Turn my work around. And I would just continue to stitch, making sure that I've got that lovely little breadth of thread on the back so that it turns well. So a nice simple design for us this week for this design. So it's called basket weave. We're going to stitch all of one direction and then come back and stitch the opposite direction. Now, not difficult, peaceful stitching, but it is a little bit time consuming, and of course in this panel we've got 3 of them to do. Let me have a look at panel number 2, and we have got 1, so we've got 1 there, that's just panel 2. We've got a second one here, flip it over, we've got a third. Go. So you've got 3 segments to stitch as well. So you are definitely going to have some work to do this week. So Let me just swap back. So that's about all for me for this week. So I'm going to get some stitching done. You can certainly use the same thread that you've used for those designs. It's just going to look a little bit bulkier. It's not right or wrong, it's just purely your personal choice. So I hope you are enjoying your stitching. Don't forget, if you haven't subscribed to us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and make sure that you head over to our private Facebook group, Indigo Niche Sashiko Community, and join. Don't forget, answer the membership questions and agree to the group rules. Otherwise, unfortunately, we will be denying your entry. You don't have to have purchased from Indigo Niche, but we do need to know that you're a real person, so, and that you have an interest in sashiko. So head over to Indigo Niche Sashiko Community. We would love to have you in there, and we look forward to seeing your progress photos posted in there of our sew along. So we'll see you again soon. Bye.